Good evening, listeners. Welcome to Noir Intellect. I'm your host, Victor Blackwood. If you enjoy mysteries, hidden clues, and uncovering the truth, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Leave it in the comments below. Now, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The mystery begins now. Chapter 1. The Bible with one page missing. Rain had been falling over New York since breakfast. Not heavily enough to justify an umbrella, but persistently enough to make every sidewalk look like it had been polished by hand. At 4 in the afternoon, I was standing in the front hall of the brownstone, watching water crawl down the glass panels of the door. When the bell rang, I opened it. The woman on the stoop held an object wrapped in brown paper against her chest, as though she were protecting it from both the rain and the world. She was perhaps 35, tall, dark-haired, and dressed with the kind of restrained good taste that suggested money without advertising it. Her face was pale, though whether from worry or whether I couldn't tell. Goodwin? That's me. I need to see Nero Wolfe. That depends. On what? Whether you've brought a problem, a corpse, or a check. She looked at the brown package. A problem? Then you're ahead of most people. She gave me the ghost of a smile. My name is Eleanor Vane. I knew the name. Not personally, but the Varneys had occupied a respectable place in New York society for generations. Their family had money in railroads, then manufacturing, then property. They had the sort of name that appeared in newspaper society columns without ever appearing in police reports, until now. Come in, Miss Vane. She entered. I took her coat and noticed that the brown paper around the package was wet at the corners. What have you got? My family Bible. That's all. One page is missing. I looked at the package again. That sounds like a job for a librarian. Her expression did not change. It may be a job for a detective. That interested me. I led her into the office. Wolfe was absent. This was not unusual at 4 in the afternoon. He was upstairs among his orchids, which meant that for the moment the world was permitted to continue without his supervision. Miss Vane sat. I poured coffee. She declined. Tea? No, thank you. Whiskey? No. You're making it difficult for me to establish your seriousness. I am serious, I smiled. I was beginning to suspect it. She placed the package on the table. The Bible has belonged to my family since 1891. That's a respectable amount of time for a book to survive. It has always been kept in a locked cabinet. Why? Tradition. Who had the key? My grandmother, then my mother, then me. Anyone else? No. How recently did you discover the missing page? 3 weeks ago. How? She hesitated. I was preparing the Bible for a family gathering. Why? My grandmother died in September. I'm sorry. Thank you. She looked down at the package. After her death, I was asked to bring the Bible to the family house for Thanksgiving. I unlocked the cabinet. I opened the Bible, and one page was missing. Exactly one. From where? The family records. That changed things. Family Bibles are often more interesting than people realize. Births, marriages, deaths, property notes, handwritten comments, dates that never appeared in public records. What was written on the missing page? I don't know. You never saw it? I saw the page. She corrected herself. Years ago. What was on it? Anything unusual? I don't remember. Who wrote them? Different members of the family. And the last entry? I don't know. She looked toward the staircase. I want Mr. Wolfe to examine it. You'll get your wish. I went upstairs. Wolfe was seated beside a tray of orchids, holding a blossom beneath a magnifying glass. Miss Vane is downstairs. Why? She has brought a Bible. Why? One page is missing. He did not look up. Books lose pages. This one belonged to her family since 1891. Families lose members. One of hers died recently. That got his attention. Who? Her uncle Richard Vane. When? Several weeks ago. Costs. Apparently heart failure. Apparently? She says he died shortly after demanding that the Bible be brought to him. Wolfe lowered the magnifying glass. Ah, that single syllable was enough. He stood. Bring the Bible. She brought it. Then bring the woman. I returned downstairs. Mr. Wolfe will see you. Miss Vane rose immediately. Wolfe entered the office and settled behind his desk. He looked at Eleanor Vane for several seconds. You say your Uncle Richard requested the Bible shortly before his death? Yes. When? 3 days before. Why? He didn't say. Did he know the page was missing? I don't know. Who told you? He wanted it. Yes, exact words, she thought. He said, "Bring me the family Bible. I need to check something. Anything else?" "No." "What happened?" "My mother sent someone to his apartment with the Bible." "Who?" "My cousin Peter." "Did Richard receive it?" "No." "Why, he died that night." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Before the Bible arrived?" "Yes." "And when did you discover the missing page?" 3 weeks later." "Where was the Bible between your uncle's death and your discovery?" "In my mother's house." "Locked?" "Yes." "Who had access?" "Anyone else?" "Housekeeper." "My father." "Me." "Could someone have removed a page?" She looked uncomfortable. "Yes." "Could someone have removed it before your uncle asked for the Bible?" "I don't know." Wolfe extended one hand. "The Bible." "I removed the brown paper. The book was large, dark brown, and worn at the corners. Its leather cover had softened with age. The spine had been repaired more than once." Wolfe did not open it immediately. He examined the cover, the edges, the stitching, the binding. Then he opened it. He turned pages slowly. Birth records, deaths, marriages, names written in several hands across more than a century. He stopped. Here. The family records section had a clean interruption. One page was absent, not torn roughly, removed. The remaining edges had been carefully concealed beneath a later repair. Wolfe touched the binding. "How long has this been here?" "I don't know." "Neither do I." He reached for a magnifying glass. I watched his expression change. "Not much." "Just enough." "What?" He ignored me. He examined the inner spine, then the paper, then the newer adhesive. Finally he looked at Eleanor Vane. "Who repaired this Bible?" "My grandfather." "When?" "I believe in 1968. Believe my mother has the receipt." "Obtain it." She nodded. Wolfe closed the Bible. "The page was not removed recently." Miss Vane stared at him. "But I found it missing 3 weeks ago." "That is not the same thing." "You mean someone removed it years ago?" "Many years ago." "How many?" "Not yet determined." I leaned forward. "Then why does the damage look recent?" Wolfe gave me a brief look. "Because someone wanted it to." Silence. Rain struck the windows. Miss Vane's face had gone pale again. "Who?" Wolfe shook his head. "That is the question." She looked at the Bible. "Then someone has been lying to my family." "Almost certainly." "About the page?" "Perhaps." "About what was written on it?" "More likely." She swallowed. "My Uncle Richard knew." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "You believe that?" He demanded the Bible. 3 days before death." "Yes." "And he died before seeing it?" "Yes." Wolfe opened the Bible again. His finger rested beside the empty place. "Then we have two events." "Two?" "The page disappeared years ago." He looked at her. "Someone recently wanted your family to believe it had disappeared 3 weeks ago." I felt the case change shape. The missing page was no longer the mystery. It was evidence of a second mystery. Someone had removed a page from a family Bible long ago. Someone else had carefully disguised the old damage decades later. And Richard Vane, shortly before his death, had suddenly remembered that the Bible mattered. Wolfe closed the cover. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes?" "Find out everything you can about Richard Vane." Miss Vane stood. "Will you take the case?" Wolfe looked at the old Bible. "I already have." She exhaled slowly. For the first time since entering the brownstone, she seemed relieved. I was not. I knew Wolfe well enough to recognize the expression on his face. He had found the beginning, and beginnings were usually the dangerous part. Because if one page had been removed from the Vane family Bible decades ago, and someone had later gone to considerable trouble to make that removal appear recent, then the person who had altered the evidence had not merely been hiding the past. He had been preparing for someone to discover it. And judging by Richard Vane's final request, someone had discovered it anyway. Chapter 2. The Name Beneath the Ink. The next morning I learned that old family Bibles have one great advantage over human witnesses. They cannot change their stories after breakfast. People can. By 9 o'clock, Eleanor Vane had telephoned twice, Martin Bell had telephoned once, and Inspector Kramer had telephoned merely to ask whether Wolfe had somehow acquired a corpse without informing him. I told him no. He sounded disappointed. "You're sure?" "Quite." "Then what is Wolfe doing?" "Looking at a Bible." "That sounds worse." He hung up. I went upstairs. Wolfe was in the orchid room, where the November rain had turned the windows grey, and the humid warmth inside made the weather outside seem like somebody else's problem. He was examining a pale cat layer. "Goodwin." "Yes?" "Do you know what an estate ledger looks like?" "A ledger." "Very good. With pages." Also good. Numbers. Excellent. I've earned breakfast. You've earned a question. I waited. Why does a family Bible contain property figures? It doesn't. Then, why is Richard Vane obsessed with missing figures? I stared at him. You've been talking to someone. I've been listening. To whom? She didn't mention figures yesterday. She telephoned after you went to bed. I sighed. Anything else? She remembered something. What? Her Uncle Richard had begun asking about old property accounts. Which property? Ashby House. I knew the name. Everyone in the Vane family knew it. Ashby House was an old country estate north of the city, surrounded by woodland and fields that had become increasingly valuable as New York expanded outward. The house itself was Georgian in appearance, large enough to require servants, repairs, arguments, and an annual income that would have supported a small republic. Who owns it? I asked. That, Wolfe said, is what you will discover. He handed me a note. Visit the Vane residence. Who am I interviewing? Martin Bell. The solicitor? Yes. Anything particular? Ask him about the Bible. Why? Because yesterday he claimed all family documents were preserved. And he also claimed never to have seen the family records. I looked at him. Those statements conflict. Exactly. The Vane residence occupied a quiet street, where the houses seemed designed to reassure their owners that nothing unpleasant could happen within them. A maid admitted me. Martin Bell received me in a library lined with legal volumes and family portraits. He was 60 perhaps, with silver hair, narrow shoulders, and the polished manner of a man who had spent 40 years making other people believe that complications were temporary. Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Bell. I understand Mr. Wolfe has taken an interest. He takes an interest in many things. I hope this one proves unnecessary. That depends. On what? Whether the truth has already been preserved. He smiled. Yes. All family documents? Yes. The Bible? His smile weakened. That is a family possession, not a legal record. Did you know it contains family records? Of course. Have you seen them? He hesitated. No. I waited. Never. I have never examined them. But you know they exist. Yes. How? The inscription. What inscription? He looked toward the doorway, then back at me. The first page bears the family dedication. Written by whom? I believe it was Eleanor's great-grandfather. What does it say? I don't recall. Interesting. A solicitor, who remembered the existence of an inscription, but claimed not to remember its wording. I opened my notebook. Tell me about Ashby House. Why? Because Thomas Vane claims Eleanor's branch never owned it outright. Bell's face tightened. Thomas is mistaken. Why? The records are clear. Which records? Deeds. Where are they? In the family archive. Could I see them? No. Why not? Because they are private, I thought. All relevant documents were preserved. They are. Then preservation has become remarkably similar to secrecy. He did not smile. Mr. Goodwin, the Vane family has endured many disputes. I've heard Thomas is ambitious. So was Richard. Bell looked at me sharply. Richard was ill. He was also asking about the Bible. That proves nothing. He was asking about Ashby House. Who told you? Eleanor. Bell leaned back. Richard was confused toward the end. About property? About many things. Did he mention missing figures? Bell's eyes moved slightly. It was a tiny reaction. Enough. Who told you that phrase? He asked. I smiled. You're the second person to ask me that. Who was the first? Mr. Wolfe. Bell said nothing. I closed the notebook. Thank you. He rose. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Be careful with family disputes. I usually am. Some people remember what they want to remember. I looked at him. And some people preserve what they want others to remember. For the first time his expression lost its polish. I left. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was eating lunch. Roast chicken, potatoes, asparagus. He did not look up when I entered. Well, Bell is lying. About? The Bible? Good. And Ashby House? Better. He claims the deeds are clear. Are they? I don't know. Find out. I also asked about the inscription. Wolfe stopped eating. What did he say? He remembered it existed, but not what it said. Correct. Interesting. You've used that word several times. I have found several interesting things, such as... He placed his knife down. Look at the Bible. I opened it. Now look at the dedication. I read the faded handwriting. To the family that keeps its house, its name, and its accounts in order. I frowned. That's odd. Why? Most people dedicate a Bible to faith or family. Precisely. This one mentions accounts, which means the family records may not be purely genealogical. Wolfe nodded. The page may have contained financial information, property figures. Likely. Richard knew. Probably. And Bell? He knew enough to lie. I spent the afternoon tracing Ashby House. The public records were incomplete. That was the polite way of describing them. Ownership changed hands repeatedly during the early 20th century. Vane family documents listed Eleanor's great-grandfather as owner. County records showed something more complicated. A partial interest, a transfer, then another. The trail ended in a private agreement that had never been fully recorded. I copied the reference. Then I went looking for Samuel Price. Eleanor had mentioned him that morning. Former accountant. Retired 20 years. Still living in a small apartment in Brooklyn. He answered the door himself. He was 82, thin, straight-backed, and possessed the kind of eyes that made you wonder how many mistakes people had made in front of him. "You are Richard Vane's detective." "I'm Archie's assistant." That is what detectives call themselves when they have better manners. "I'll take that." He invited me inside. His apartment contained very little furniture, almost no decoration, except for books, ledgers, accounting manuals, old newspapers. "What do you know about Richard?" Price sat. He was frightened. Of what? Numbers. Numbers don't usually frighten wealthy families. Numbers don't. He looked at me. Missing numbers do. I opened my notebook. "Richard told you that?" "Not directly." "What did he say?" "He came to me 3 months ago." "Why?" "He wanted old accounts." Ashby. That name again. "What did he ask?" "Who had paid the taxes, and who had collected rents, and who had recorded expenses." I leaned forward. "Why?" Price's expression became grim. "Because the figures did not balance." "By how much?" How much?" "You were an accountant. I was retired." "Of course I remember." He looked toward the window. Richard kept saying the same thing. "What?" "Exactly those words, exactly." "What did he mean?" Price hesitated. "He believed someone had taken money from Ashby House for years." "Who?" "I never knew." "Did he suspect Martin Bell?" Price looked at me. "I did not mention Bell." "You didn't have to," he sighed. Richard didn't trust him. "Why?" "Because Bell always knew what was in the old records. Yet he says he never saw the Bible's family records." Price gave a small, humorless laugh. "Then Bell has forgotten a great deal." I returned to Wolfe with the phrase, "the missing figures." He nodded. "Price confirms it." "What did Richard seek?" "Old accounts concerning Ashby House. Taxes, rents, expenses, all of it." "Did Price know why?" "He believed Richard suspected money had been diverted." Wolfe leaned back. "By whom?" "Unknown." "And the Bible?" I placed a copy of the dedication on his desk. He read it. "Accounts. Yes. Property. Yes. Family history. Yes." I watched his eyes narrow. "The missing page may have been a ledger disguised as genealogy." "That's my thought." "No." He looked up. "Your thought is correct. Thank you. Do not become accustomed to it." He reached for the Bible. "The important question is not what was written on the missing page. What is it? Why someone wanted the family to believe it was removed recently, to conceal an older crime, perhaps, or to make Richard's discovery look accidental." Wolfe shook his head. "Not quite." "What then?" He opened the Bible to the dedication. "The page was removed long ago." "Yes." "Then someone repaired the damage in 1968. "Yes." "Why repair a missing page?" "To hide the removal." "Exactly. Who repaired it?" "Your grandfather, according to Eleanor." "So the person who disguised the damage lived in the family, or worked for it?" I sat down. "Then we're looking at 2 acts, removal and concealment." "Correct. Different people?" "Possibly." Wolfe closed the Bible. "If they were different people, we have 2 motives." That evening, Eleanor returned. She brought a photograph. It showed the Vane family standing outside Ashby House sometime in the 1950s. At the center stood an elderly man I recognized from family portraits. Beside him stood Martin Bell. "You've seen this?" I asked. "Many times." "When was it taken?" 1958. "Who is the man beside your grandfather?" "Bell." "Was he already the family solicitor?" "Yes." "Did he have access to the Bible?" She hesitated. "I suppose." "Where was the Bible kept then?" "In the library." "Locked?" "Always." "Who had the key?" "My grandfather." "Anyone else?" She looked at the photograph. "Bell, that was enough." Wolfe examined the picture. "Interesting." I smiled. You've used that word again. He ignored me. Instead, he pointed toward the back of the photograph. There was handwriting, a date, a short note, and one name. Samuel Price. Eleanor frowned. Why is his name written there? I don't know. Wolfe handed the photograph back. I do. We both looked at him. Price was not merely the accountant. What was he? Someone who knew where the numbers came from. And the Bible? Wolfe opened it once more. His finger rested upon the empty space where the missing page had been. The numbers may have been copied here. From the accounts? Perhaps. Then the page wasn't a family record. It was a record of ownership. I looked at him. Why hide property figures in a Bible? Because everyone would assume they were harmless. He closed the cover. And because a family Bible is often trusted more than a ledger. Rain began again against the windows. Wolfe stared at the dark glass. Mr. Goodwin, yes? Find out who owned Ashby House in 1958. And find out who paid for the 1968 Bible repair. I reached for my coat. You're thinking the repair is the key. No, he looked toward the Bible. The repair is the lock. I stopped. Then what's the key? Wolfe's expression became almost pleased. The name beneath the ink. I looked down at the dedication. There was nothing there, only old handwriting, old paper, old family, history. But Wolfe had already turned away. And I knew that meant he had seen something I had not. Again. Chapter 3. The ledger in the locked cabinet. By the following morning I had learned two things about Ashby House. The first was that nobody agreed who had owned it. The second was that everybody agreed it had been worth owning. This is a useful distinction in New York families. When property is worthless, relatives remember the facts. When property is valuable, they remember opinions. At 10 o'clock I was back at the Vane residence, where Eleanor met me in the library wearing a dark green dress and an expression that suggested she had spent the night arguing with herself. Mr. Goodwin, good morning. Did Mr. Wolfe find anything? He found several things. About the Bible? About everything. She looked toward the shelves. Then you should see this. She led me to a tall bookcase near the fireplace. I found it after you left yesterday. What is it? I don't know. That's usually why people show things to detectives. She gave me a tired smile. My grandfather kept the legal records here. I was looking through them after you left. Looking for what? I don't know that either. She touched 3 large volumes bound in dark green leather. I noticed one had been moved. Recently? I think so. I pulled it out. Nothing. The space behind it was only a narrow recess. Then I saw the edge of another book pushed far toward the back. I reached in. It came free with a soft scrape. The cover was black. No title, no initials, no date. I opened it. The handwriting was old. Columns of figures filled page after page. Payments, receipts, taxes, repairs, rent, insurance, and repeatedly in the margin, Ashby House. I whistled softly. Eleanor came closer. What is it? A book that has been trying not to be found. I turned several pages, then stopped. Several entries had been crossed out with heavy black strokes. Not ordinary corrections. The ink was so thick that the original figures were almost completely concealed. Who kept this? I don't know. Your grandfather? Possibly. Your father? I don't know. Richard? She shook her head. I've never seen it. I examined the handwriting. The entries appeared to span more than a decade. The oldest were dated 1954, the newest 1963. Then I saw a sequence of payments from 1958, the same year as the family photograph. The same year Martin Bell had been standing beside Eleanor's grandfather outside Ashby House. I copied the entries. Then I noticed something else. The crossed-out transactions clustered around specific months. April, September, November, again the following year, again the year after. I closed the ledger. We're going to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the dining room. Fritz had prepared roast duck, celery hearts, potatoes, and a salad that had been treated with such seriousness that I suspected it had received legal advice. I put the ledger beside Wolfe's plate. He looked at it, then at me. You interrupted lunch. I've been told this is sometimes necessary. By whom? My conscience sent him away. I opened the ledger. Found in the Vane library. Wolfe examined the cover. Where? Behind legal volumes. Hidden? Not exactly. Explain. The ledger had been pushed behind the books. Intentionally, almost certainly. He opened it. The room became quiet except for the ticking clock. Wolfe read the first page. Then another. Then another. His expression changed. Not dramatically. He simply stopped eating. That was enough. Payments concerning Ashby House. Yes. Dates, 1954 through 1963. Crossed out? By whom? I don't know. He examined the ink. Not the original writer. How can you tell? The handwriting differs. The same person could have written both. Could. He pointed to the crossed-out entries. The pressure is excessive. So? The person who erased these figures was not correcting an error. What was he doing? Destroying evidence. He turned several pages. Here, a payment. Then another. Then a third. All connected to Ashby House. Wolfe took a pencil. Observe the dates. I did. 1958. Yes. 1959. Yes. 1960. Yes. The ownership transfer. I looked at him. What about it? The transfer occurred in 1961. So? These payments stop in 1960. He turned one more page. Then begin again in 1962. I stared. After the transfer. Exactly. What does that prove? That the transfer changed who received the money. He closed the ledger, but not who controlled it. Eleanor arrived an hour later. Wolfe showed her the ledger. She looked shocked. I've never seen this. Your family has. How do you know? Because it was hidden in your grandfather's library. She sat. I don't understand. Your uncle did. Her eyes lifted. What do you mean? He was reconstructing these figures. She shook her head. Richard never told me. What did he ask you? She hesitated, then answered. 3 weeks before he died, he asked whether I'd ever read the handwritten pages in the Bible. Exactly what did he say? He asked. Have you ever read what grandfather wrote in the Bible? And you? I said no. What did he say? He seemed disappointed. Anything else? She looked down. He said, then you don't know what Ashby House cost us. I glanced at Wolfe. He showed no reaction. What happened afterward? He asked. Richard told me to forget the question. Why? He said some family history was better left alone. Did he seem frightened? Yes. Of whom? I asked him. What did he say? He wouldn't answer. Wolfe nodded. That is useful. Eleanor stared at him. How can fear be useful? Because it identifies importance. After Eleanor left, Wolfe remained silent for several minutes. I poured myself coffee. You've got something. Yes. You're going to make me ask. Yes. Why? 'Cause you enjoy asking. I enjoy being told. You enjoy both. He opened the Bible. The missing page belonged here. Yes. The ledger contains the same period. Yes. Richard asked about the handwritten records. Yes. He then referred to Ashby House. Yes. So? I waited. Wolfe turned the Bible sideways. Paper remembers. I looked at him. That's poetic. It is physical. He pointed toward the inner margin of the ledger. There is an indentation. I leaned closer. At first I saw nothing. Then, under the proper angle of light, a faint rectangular depression became visible in the paper. It matched the size of the missing Bible page. My mouth opened. You've got to be kidding. No. Someone put the Bible page on top of this ledger, or the ledger page beneath the Bible, and wrote on it. Precisely. I examined the indentation. The pressure marks were faint but unmistakable. There must have been writing. Yes. Can we recover it? Perhaps. How? Not yet. He reached for the ledger again. The important thing is that the Bible and ledger were physically connected. The page was placed here at some point. Why? To copy figures. Or transfer them. Yes, I looked at the missing page. Then the Bible was being used as a record. Not exactly. What then? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. As a second record. That evening I returned to the Vane residence alone. Eleanor had given me permission to search the library. I was looking for the original ledger compartment, not the book. The place behind it. The recess was deeper than I had realized. I removed the legal volumes one by one. At the rear of the cabinet I found a narrow wooden panel. It had no handle. I pressed it. Nothing. I pressed harder. Still nothing. Then I noticed a tiny brass pin disguised as part of the shelving. I pushed it. The panel released. Behind it was a shallow compartment, empty, except for a strip of paper. I pulled it out. 3 words had been written across it. See the Bible. I stared at them. Then I turned the paper over. Nothing. I hurried back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in his office. I placed the note before him. He read it. Interesting. That word again. Appropriate. We don't know. It was hidden behind the ledger. Yes, someone wanted whoever found the ledger to look at the Bible. Correct. Which means the missing page was not merely evidence. No, it was an instruction. Wolfe leaned back. Perhaps. To whom? That is the more useful question. At 8 o'clock the telephone rang, I answered. A man's voice said, "Mr. Goodwin?" "Yes." "It's Martin Bell." "I understand you found a ledger." There was no point pretending. "Yes." "Where?" "In the Vane Library. That book is private. So is most evidence. I don't think you understand." I understand perfectly." His voice hardened. "You should return it. I'll mention your request." "To Mr. Wolfe?" "Naturally." Another pause. Then he said quietly, "Richard made the same mistake." The line went dead. I stood holding the receiver. Wolfe looked up. "What did he say?" I repeated it. Wolfe's expression became still. "That is our first direct threat." "You think so?" "Yes." "Then Bell knows about the ledger." "Obviously." "And Richard's mistake?" "Finding the numbers, the missing figures exactly." Next morning, Wolfe asked me to place the ledger beside the Bible. He did not open either. He simply studied them. Then he said, "The family believed the Bible contained names. It contained figures. More than that." He opened the Bible to the missing page. Someone removed the page because it contained a connection between Ashby House and the accounts. Yes. Then someone repaired the damage in 1968 to make the removal appear old. Correct. Why? Wait. Because the repair was not meant to hide the original crime from everyone. Who was it meant to fool? Wolfe looked at me. The family.
Why?
Because a page that vanished recently would cause questions, and an old missing page would become family history. I understood. Make the crime look ancient. Precisely. Then nobody investigates, unless someone remembers. Richard, and now us. Yes. He closed the Bible. For several seconds, then Wolfe touched the ledger. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes." "Find the person who paid for the 1968 repair. I'll start with the receipt." And the person who signed for it. And the person who delivered the Bible. Good. And Martin Bell. Especially Bell. I reached for my coat. Wolfe. Yes, the indentation, what about it? If the missing Bible page was placed over this ledger, then the writing left an impression. Correct. Could we recover the writing? He looked toward the orchid room. Eventually. How? With patience. That's not a method. It is when the paper has survived. He turned toward his orchids. Everything written leaves a trace. I looked at the Bible. One page had vanished. One ledger had been hidden. One set of figures had been crossed out. But paper had remembered what people had tried to forget. And for the first time, I had the uneasy feeling that the missing page was not missing at all. It had simply been separated from the place where its meaning could be understood. Chapter 4. The man who remembered the wrong year. There are two kinds of family history. The first is what a family remembers. The second is what a family has agreed to remember. The distinction became important on a Thursday morning, when Nero Wolfe summoned 4 people to his office and instructed me to make certain that none of them arrived early enough to compare stories. I asked why. He said, "Because memory is contagious." That was all. By 10 o'clock, the brownstone had acquired the atmosphere of a courtroom without the inconvenience of a judge. Martin Bell arrived first. Thomas Vane came 5 minutes later. Samuel Price followed. Clara Mercer came last. Wolfe had ordered Fritz to serve coffee, but he did not offer food. That told me he expected the proceedings to be brief. I knew better. Nothing involving Nero Wolfe, a family Bible, a missing page, a disputed estate, and 4 people who remembered different years was ever brief. Wolfe sat behind his desk. The Bible rested to his right. The old ledger lay open beside it. The faint indentation in the ledger page was protected beneath a sheet of glass. Martin Bell noticed it immediately. His eyes moved away. That was the first interesting thing of the morning. Thomas Vane looked at the ledger. Samuel Price looked at the Bible. Clara Mercer looked at Wolfe. Wolfe looked at all 4. Then he said, "We are going to discuss Ashby House." Thomas shifted in his chair. "Why?" "Because you have been discussing it for years." "I don't know what you mean." "You said the property changed ownership in 1937. Thomas nodded. "That is correct." Clara Mercer spoke from the corner. "No." Everyone looked at her. She appeared surprised that she had spoken aloud. I beg your pardon, Wolfe said. Clara straightened. I said no. Thomas turned toward her. Mrs. Mercer, you may be mistaken. I may. She folded her hands in her lap. But I remember 1936. Wolfe smiled. Excellent. Thomas looked irritated. What's excellent about disagreement? Disagreement is frequently more reliable than agreement. He turned to me. Mr. Goodwin, take notes. I already had my notebook open. Mr. Vane, Wolfe said. When did Ashby House change ownership? 1937. March. Day? I don't recall. Who transferred it? The family. To whom? An investment company. Name? The Ashby Development Company. Was the transfer voluntary? Thomas hesitated. Yes. Under what agreement? I don't know. Wolfe turned toward Clara. Mrs. Mercer? She was 70 or thereabouts, with silver hair and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades observing people who assumed servants were furniture. The family meeting was in November 1936. Where? At Mr. Charles Vane. His brother Henry, Mr. Bell, Mr. Price. Samuel Price shifted. Anyone else? Vane. Clara paused. Thomas's father. Thomas frowned. My father was 12. Then I suppose he attended. He would have been 15. Clara looked at him. No, your father was born in 1921. Thomas stared. Clara smiled faintly. He was 17. Thomas looked uncomfortable. I wrote the number down. 17. Wolfe did not comment. He turned to Samuel Price. When did the transfer occur? Price folded his hands. 1935. Thomas laughed. Clara shook her head. Wolfe, he said. Why? Price blinked. Because the first agreement was signed in 1935. The transfer? 1937. He stopped. That is what I meant. No, Wolfe said. Price looked at him. You meant, then you corrected yourself. Yes. Why? I made an error. Naturally. Wolfe looked at me. 3 dates. I nodded. 1935, 1936, 1937. Exactly. Thomas leaned forward. Surely this is pointless. No. Wolfe's voice became colder. 3 dates surrounding one transaction are never pointless. Martin Bell cleared his throat. The property records settle the matter. Do they? Yes. Which year do they show? 1937. Convenient. Bell stiffened. Accurate. Wolfe opened the ledger. Mr. Bell, did you ever see this book? No. Never. No. Yet it concerns Ashby House. I was the family solicitor. That is not an answer. Bell looked irritated. I did not keep family financial ledgers. Who did, Mr. Price? Samuel Price shook his head. Not this one. Bell turned. Accountant. I was. Maintain the accounts. Some of them. Then this ledger was yours. No. Why not? Because these entries are not mine. I looked at Wolfe. That was the first crack. Bell saw it too. Mr. Price, Wolfe said. Whose handwriting is this? Price leaned forward. He studied the page. I don't know. Try. Price examined it longer. Then his face changed. I've seen it. Where? On deposit slips. Bell spoke sharply. What deposit slips? Bank. Deposits. What bank? Price didn't answer. Wolfe did. That is the question. I had expected the bank records to take days. They took 6 hours. Money has one useful quality. It leaves paper behind, even when people don't. By late afternoon I had located an old account reference in a bank archive. The account had been opened in 1936. The name was almost familiar, Ashby Family Holdings, but it did not appear in the estate records, nor in the property ledger, nor in the legal documents. The account had remained active for 4 years. Deposits arrived irregularly, large amounts. Some were labeled as rent. Others were simply numbered. I copied the entries and returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the orchid room. I found him among the plants, wearing his dark house coat, inspecting a flowering orchid with the concentration of a jeweler. There was a bank account. He did not look up. When? 1936. That got his attention. Name? Ashby Family Holdings. Owner? The account was opened under that name. Who signed 2 signatures? Whose? I handed him the photocopies. He examined them. One signature belonged to Charles Vane. The other belonged to Martin Bell. Wolfe looked at me, and the account was omitted from the estate records. Yes. When did it close? 1940. Who received the final balance? The record is incomplete. Of course. He returned the papers. Now we have the year, 1936. Yes. Why is it so important? Because an agreement existed before the property transfer. Agreement with whom? We do not yet know. The account received money before the transfer. Yes, and after. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then the agreement did not expire when the property changed hands. He walked back toward his chair. Someone altered the date from 1936 to 1930, precisely, so it would appear that the financial agreement ended before ownership changed. Exactly. I followed him. But why? Because if the agreement survived the transfer, someone continued receiving money under it. The hidden bank account, yes. And someone wanted that account disconnected from Ashby House. More importantly, from the Vane family. At 7 that evening, the 4 witnesses assembled again. This time, Wolfe did not offer coffee. He placed the bank records on the desk. Thomas looked at them. Martin Bell did not. Samuel Price stared at the floor. Clara Mercer remained perfectly still. Wolfe said, "The property changed hands in 1937. Thomas nodded. "That is what I said." "No." Thomas frowned. "You said it." "I said you said it." The room went silent. Wolfe continued. "The transaction began in 1936. Thomas shook his head. "That is impossible." "Why?" "Because the deed says 1937. The deed does not describe the beginning of the arrangement. It describes the transfer." "Yes." "Then what are we arguing about?" "Money." Wolfe tapped the bank records. "Money began moving in 1936. Thomas looked toward Bell. Bell remained silent. "Who opened the account?" Wolfe asked. Thomas said nothing. "Mr. Bell?" "No comment. That is unfortunate." Wolfe turned to Price. "You remember the account?" Price nodded. "Yes." "Why did you forget the year?" "I didn't." "You said 1935. I remembered the first agreement, which was 1935. And the bank account, 1936. And the family meeting?" Clara answered. 1936. Wolfe nodded. He raised one finger. "Agreement in 1935. A second, financial account in 1936. A third, family meeting in 1936. He looked toward Thomas. Property transfer in 1937. Thomas said quietly, So the official family story begins 1 year too late." No one moved. Wolfe continued. "That missing year contains the money." Martin Bell finally spoke. "This is speculation. No, the bank account proves nothing. It proves you opened an account." Bell's face hardened. "On behalf of the family." "Yes, and Ashby Family Holdings." "Yes." "Why was it omitted from the estate records?" "I don't know." Wolfe nodded. "That is the answer I expected." Bell stared at him. "Why?" "Because you remember the Bible's inscription." Bell went still, but claimed never to have read the family records. No one spoke. Wolfe continued. "You knew the Bible contained a dedication concerning accounts." Bell's face had lost its color. "You knew Richard had begun asking about the old figures. You knew the ledger existed. You knew Ashby House had been subject to an agreement before the 1937 transfer. You knew the date had changed." Bell stood. "This is absurd." Wolfe looked at him. "Sit down." Bell sat, not because he wanted to, because there was nowhere else to go. I glanced at the Bible, the missing page, the ledger, the bank account, the disputed dates. Everything was beginning to converge. Wolfe noticed me looking. "The page," he said. Everyone turned toward him. The missing page contained the figures. Thomas shook his head. "You don't know enough. The page could have contained births. It could. Debts. It could. Marriage. It could." Wolfe pointed to the ledger. "But why would someone place a Bible page over a financial ledger?" Nobody answered. "Because the handwriting mattered." He looked at Clara. "You worked for the family for more than 30 years. "Yes." "Did you ever see anyone copying figures into the Bible?" She hesitated, then said, "Yes." Thomas turned sharply. "Who?" Clara looked toward Wolfe. "Mr. Bell." "When?" 1936. The room became very quiet. Clara continued. "He was in the library late at night." "Doing what?" "Writing." "In the Bible." "I didn't know what it was. Did you see the page?" "Yes." "What did you see?" "Numbers." Bell opened his eyes. "Mrs. Mercer." She looked at him. Wolfe nodded. "Of course you do." After everyone left, I stood beside Wolfe's desk. "That settles the year." "Yes." "The agreement began in 1935. The financial account appeared in 1936. The property transfer followed in 1937, and the official story began in 1937. So the agreement was made to look expired. Correct. But what was the agreement? Wolfe looked at the Bible. That is what the missing page tells us. We still don't have it. No. The ledger has its impression, yes. Could we recover the writing now? He looked toward the lamp. Not yet. Why? Because we must know what we are looking for. I frowned. Isn't that backwards? Not at all. He opened the ledger and placed the glass over the faint indentation. The page was written upon while resting here. Yes. The pressure transferred. Yes. Which means the missing page once contained more than figures. What else? Wolfe pointed toward a faint line beneath the indentation. I leaned closer. I could just make out the ghost of letters. One looked like a V, another like an A, then a space. Then something that might have been an R. I looked up. Wolfe, I think the missing page contained names and numbers. He nodded. Exactly. Then it wasn't merely an accounting record. No, it was a record of who received the money. Yes. And who controlled Ashby House before the transfer. Yes. I stared at the faint impressions. The mystery had begun with a missing page. Now we knew the page had once carried numbers, names, a date, and probably an agreement. The problem was that the person who had removed it had not merely wanted to erase a financial secret. Someone had wanted to erase the people connected to it. And if Martin Bell was telling the truth about nothing, he was telling it with remarkable consistency. Chapter 5. The page that was not destroyed. There is a particular kind of silence that occurs when Nero Wolfe has decided that everyone else is wrong. It is not the silence of uncertainty. It is the silence of superiority. On Friday morning, I found him sitting behind his desk with the family Bible open before him and the old ledger beside it. Sunlight came through the windows in narrow, pale strips, and somewhere upstairs, Fritz was arguing with a delivery man about the proper temperature of something that had probably once been alive. Wolfe did not look up when I entered. The page was not destroyed. Good morning to you two. It was not destroyed. You've said that twice. I am emphasizing it. Why? He touched the Bible. Because the evidence says so. The clean removal? One indication. The stitching? Another? The indentation? Third. And the fourth. He looked at me. People destroy inconvenient documents. Yes. They do not usually preserve the evidence of their existence. I pulled out a chair. So where is it? That is your assignment. I sighed. I knew there was a catch. There is always a catch. He turned the Bible around. Look, I examined the binding. The page was removed without damaging the neighboring sheets. Yes, whoever did it knew bookbinding, or had access to someone who did. Then why not destroy the page? Because the page valuable. To whom? That is what you will discover. The Old Vane residence had become strangely quiet since the investigation began. The housekeeper moved through the rooms with the caution of someone who had learned that old houses listened. Eleanor met me in the library. Mr. Wolfe sent you? Yes. He believes the page is still here. He believes it was stored. She looked toward the shelves. I searched them, not thoroughly. I thought I did. She smiled. You sound like him. I've been accused of worse. We began with the library. Books, cabinets, drawers, writing desks, a locked bureau. Nothing. Then the fireplace. Nothing. Then the wall safe. Empty, except for family jewelry and securities. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the lower cabinet beneath the window. The wood was darker around one section. I crouched. There was a keyhole. Do you have a key? Eleanor shook her head. I've never seen it. I tried several keys from the desk. Nothing. Then I remembered something Wolfe had once told me. When a lock is old enough, it sometimes remembers a key better than its owner does. I found a small brass key in the drawer. It fit. The cabinet opened. Inside was a wooden document box, dark oak, brass corners, and on the lid were two initials, RV. Eleanor stared. Richard, apparently. She touched the initials. He never told me he kept anything here. Richard wasn't known for oversharing. I opened the box. Receipts, bank letters, cancelled checks, property notices, a bundle of correspondence tied with faded string, and beneath them, a small piece of paper. Nothing else. I picked it up. 3 figures were written on it. 4,800, 7,250, 11,600, no explanation, no dates, no names. I looked at Eleanor. Recognize them? No. I put the paper in my notebook. Let's go. Wolfe was eating breakfast when we returned. Eggs, toast, coffee, and a bowl of fruit arranged with such precision that I suspected he had threatened it. I put the document box on the desk. He stopped eating. Where? Lower cabinet in the Vane library. Yes. Key found in a desk drawer. He examined the initials. Richard Vane's, yes. He opened the box one item at a time. Receipts, correspondence, bank letters. He read quickly. I waited. Finally, he picked up the small paper. Where was this? Under everything. He looked at the three figures, then at the ledger. He turned pages, stopped, turned back, stopped again. Here I leaned over. The first figure, 4,800, appeared beside an entry from 1935. The second, 7,250, appeared in 1936. The third, 11,600, appeared in 1937. All were connected to Ashby House. I looked at Wolfe. So, he pointed to the dates. These are not random payments. What are they? Storms of what? A debt. He spread the documents across the desk. One receipt was dated December 1935. Another September 1936. Another March 1937. Each referenced a payment from one Vane account to another. No explanation, no contract, no agreement, just money. Why would family members pay one another like this? Because one branch owed another. For Ashby House? Yes. Then the property wasn't simply transferred. No. It was conditional. Precisely. I sat down. The missing page recorded the condition. Yes. Repayment. Yes. And without the page, the obligation disappeared. From the visible record, meaning the 1937 transfer looked absolute. Exactly. I looked at the old ledger. Who received the money? That is the question. Can we trace the accounts? We can. To whom? Wolfe pointed toward the bank correspondence. Richard did. I read the letters. They referred to account numbers, trust accounts, family accounts. One name appeared repeatedly. Edwin Vane, Eleanor's great-granduncle. I looked at Wolfe. Edwin. Yes, he owned the other branch, correct. So Ashby House belonged to Eleanor's branch only after Edwin was repaid. Exactly how much? Wolfe totaled the three figures. 23,650. That was a fortune. In 1937. And the agreement required repayment. Yes. Was it completed? Wolfe shook his head. Not according to these figures. Then Ashby House may never have been fully transferred. Correct. I sat back. Thomas was right. About what? That Eleanor's branch never entirely owned it. Wolfe looked at me. Thomas knew the conclusion. How? He did not know the evidence. Then who told him? That remains unclear. The telephone rang, I answered. Goodwin. Woman's voice. Eleanor Vane. Yes. I found something else. What? I was looking through Richard's papers. Go on. There is a letter. Edwin Vane. I looked toward Wolfe. When? 1937. What does it say? I don't know. Read it. There was a pause. Then Eleanor said, It says, until the final amount is paid, Ashby House remains subject to the original understanding. My eyes met Wolfe's. Anything else? Yes. Her voice trembled. It says, the page in the family Bible shall serve as the private record should the formal copy disappear. I closed my eyes. The missing page had just spoken, not through ink, through the man who had remembered it. Keep the letter, I told her. I thought you would say that. Bring it to us. When she arrived, Wolfe read the letter twice. Then he placed it beside the three figures. The page was not merely a record. What was it? A safeguard. Against whom? Anyone who attempted to rewrite the transaction. The formal copy disappeared. Yes, so the Bible became backup. Exactly. Then someone removed the backup. Many years later. Why? Because someone wanted Ashby House to appear free of obligation. Who? Wolfe looked at the letter. Someone who benefited from the disappearance. Bell, perhaps. Thomas, possibly. Richard. No, why not? Because Richard was searching for the page. Then he knew the obligation still existed. Yes. And the person who killed him? Wolfe's eyes hardened. We have no evidence yet that Richard was killed, but he died after asking for the Bible. Suspicious, very. Not proof. I nodded. That was Wolfe. He would rather have no answer than an attractive false one. The rest of the afternoon was spent reconstructing the financial arrangement. The Vane family had been divided into two branches. Edwin Vane controlled the original title to Ashby House. Charles Vane wanted the property. In 1935 they negotiated. Charles would assume the expenses. Edwin would transfer operational control, but final ownership would depend upon repayment of money advanced by Edwin. 3 payments were made: $4,800, $7,250, $11,600. Then the records stopped. The formal transfer was recorded in 1937, but the debt had not been fully settled. The private agreement remained. The missing Bible page had preserved it. Someone had removed that page. The official records had then been presented as complete. For decades, the family accepted the story, until Richard began counting. At 5 o'clock, Wolfe asked me to return to the Vane house. Why? Find the original document box. We have it. Look again. For what? The place where Richard kept it. I stared. The box was hidden. Yes. Why? Because Richard did not want someone to find it. Then why leave it in the house? Because he expected someone to find it eventually. That sounded contradictory. With Wolfe, contradiction was usually a signpost. I returned. The document box had been removed from the cabinet. I examined the cabinet again. Behind the box's former position was another recess. This one contained a folded cloth. Inside the cloth was a brass key. I took it. Eleanor watched. What does it open? I don't know. There was one room in the house I had not searched. The old study. Richard's study. The door was locked. The brass key fit. Inside, the air smelled of dust and paper. There was a desk, a safe, a filing cabinet, and a framed photograph of Ashby House. I moved the photograph. Behind it was a shallow compartment, empty, except for one envelope. It bore Richard's handwriting, for whoever finds the Bible page. I opened it. Inside was a single sentence. The page was never destroyed. Bell knows where it is. I read it twice, then a third time. Bell knows where it is, not where it was, where it is. Took the envelope and hurried back. Wolfe read the sentence. He did not react immediately, and he said, "Now we know. Where? Not yet. Who has it? Bell. Richard says so, yes. Then why hasn't Bell produced it? Because producing it would establish the debt and threaten ownership, yes. Then Bell has been protecting someone." Wolfe nodded. "Who?" "That is what Chapter 6 will tell us," I nearly said. Instead, I kept my mouth shut. Wolfe looked again at Richard's note, then at the Bible, then at the ledger. The page survived. Somewhere. Yes. And Bell knows where. Yes, then why would he tell anyone? He hasn't. Richard wrote it. Exactly. Richard must have discovered where Bell kept it. Wolfe nodded. And Bell discovered that Richard knew. The room seemed suddenly colder. I looked at the photograph of Ashby House. What happened next? Wolfe's face was expressionless. Richard died. I said nothing. He closed the envelope. "Tomorrow we ask Martin Bell a question he cannot answer." Wolfe looked toward the Bible. "Where is the page?" I smiled. "And if he says he doesn't know? Then we ask him why Richard believed he did." Wolfe returned the envelope to his desk. Outside, the rain had begun again. The old house stood somewhere beyond the city, holding its rooms, its documents, its memories. For decades, the Vane family had believed the obligation behind Ashby House had vanished. It had not. It had merely been separated from the record that proved it. And now we knew something more. The missing page was alive, somewhere in New York. Someone had protected it. Someone had hidden it. And someone had been afraid enough of it to make a man believe that a family Bible was more dangerous than a bank account. Chapter 6. The account that never closed. By Saturday morning, I had acquired a new opinion of banks. Previously, I had regarded them as places where people kept money until they found something expensive enough to spend it on. After 3 days with the Vane family, I understood their more useful function. They were places where money went to acquire an alibi. At 9:30, I was in the records department of a downtown bank, looking at documents so old that the clerks handled them with the reverence usually reserved for archaeological remains. The account was listed under a number rather than a name. The name attached to it in 1936 was Ashby Family Holdings. The name attached to it in 1939 was Ashby Management Trust. The name attached to it when the account was finally transferred was something else. But the account itself had never closed. That was the first lie. The second was more interesting. I copied the figures and returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the dining room. He had a breakfast of eggs, kidneys, toast, coffee, and fruit before him. I put the bank papers beside his plate. The account never closed. He looked at me. Which account? The Ashby account. Good. You already knew. I suspected there's a difference. Not when the suspicion is correct. I sat down. Do you want the rest? I would prefer it. The account was transferred several times. To whom? That's where it gets interesting. He put down his fork. Proceed. The original account had been opened in 1936 by Charles Vane and Martin Bell. That much we knew. The purpose was described as property management. The deposits came from rents collected at Ashby House and from payments associated with the family loan. The withdrawals were described as expenses, repairs, taxes, insurance, legal fees, all ordinary, all plausible, all carefully documented. But in 1938 something changed. The account was transferred into a trust. The trust was managed by a company whose officers included a man named Arthur Bell, Martin Bell's younger brother. In 1939, another transfer occurred. The account moved to a management company in which Arthur Bell's wife owned shares. In 1941, the money moved again, this time to an account controlled by a lawyer named Philip Grant. Grant had been Martin Bell's law partner. I looked at Wolfe. The money stayed within Bell's circle. Yes. Family money went into an account. Yes, it came out through expenses. Yes, then moved through companies connected to Bell. Yes, and nobody noticed. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Someone noticed. Richard, precisely. I spread the bank's statements across the desk. There are 3 payments that matter. Which? 1935. $4,800. First installment, 1936. $7,250. Second, 1937. $11,600. Third, the total is $23,650. Yes, but the bank records show another credit for $11,600 in 1937. Wolfe looked up. Another? Same amount. Who paid it? The account itself. He was silent. That doesn't make sense. It does if you want to make the books balance. He leaned back. Explain. The account shows $11,600 received from the Vane family. Yes. Then, the same amount appears as a payment back to the Vane family. On the same date? Within 48 hours. Why? That is the trick. I pointed to the ledger. The first entry was treated as repayment, the second as a return of funds. So someone could say the debt had been paid. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. But the money never actually left the Bell-controlled account. Correct. How was the return recorded? As a transfer. To whom? An account with the same beneficial owner. Wolfe nodded slowly. It was money moving from one pocket to another, with the appearance of repayment. Exactly. He picked up the pencil. Then the debt remained. Yes. And the property remained subject to the agreement. Yes. Unless someone removed the agreement, the Bible page. Exactly. At 11 o'clock I went to see Martin Bell. He received me in the same library, the same chair, the same polished desk, the same portrait of Charles Vane, looking down with the solemn expression of a man who had never trusted lawyers. Bell glanced at the papers in my hand. I suppose this concerns the bank. It does. I have already explained that the estate's financial affairs were properly managed. That's good. Is it? I'd hate to discover otherwise. He sat. What have you found? An account. I know about the account. Do you? Of course. Then perhaps you can explain why it never closed. He stared at me. Accounts are sometimes transferred. Not closed, transferred, to companies connected with you. That is an accusation. No, it's a fact. You should be careful. People keep telling me that. Bell's expression hardened. The account was used for estate management. Yes, were legitimate. Some. All. Then explain the duplicate payment. He said nothing. $11,600. Still nothing. Recorded as received. Silence, then recorded as returned. Bell leaned back. It was an accounting adjustment. Of course, that's all. An adjustment that made an unpaid debt appear settled. No. Then what did it do? He stared at me. I am not going to discuss confidential family affairs with you. Fine, I stood. I'll discuss them with Mr. Wolfe. Bell's face changed, only slightly, but I saw it. He was afraid. Not of me. Of Wolfe. I left. When I returned, Wolfe was reading the bank correspondence. He admitted the account. Naturally. He called the duplicate payment an accounting adjustment. Naturally. You're enjoying this. I am enjoying being correct. There's a distinction. A useful one. I handed him the transcript of the transactions. He read it. The debt was never repaid. No, the duplicate entry was the mechanism. Yes. Then the property transfer was conditional. Yes. And the present ownership is questionable. Potentially. Yet. No, he closed the fold. Where is Miss Vane? She'll be here shortly. Good. Eleanor arrived at 1. She looked tired. She had spent the morning with her family's papers. When she entered, Wolfe did not offer her a chair immediately. Miss Vane, Mr. Wolfe, your uncle knew about the account. She nodded. I thought so. How? He asked me to find something. What? Numbers. He gave me 3 amounts. She looked at the ledger. 4,800. 7s, 2 of 50, 11,600. Wolfe nodded. What did he tell you? He said. If those 3 numbers are still in the records, then the house was never theirs. There? The branch that claims ownership now. Thomas Vane's branch? Yes. Why didn't you tell me this before? I didn't understand it. Now you do? No. Good. She looked surprised. Wolfe continued. Understanding too early is often a disadvantage. Eleanor sat. Richard said something else. What? He said the Bible would prove it. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Exactly what words? He said. The old page knows who owes. Room went quiet. I looked at the Bible. There it was again, the missing page. Not merely a record, a private family authority. Wolfe opened the ledger. Miss Vane, do you know why your uncle became interested in this? Because Thomas challenged our ownership of Ashby House. When? Several months ago. Before Richard began investigating. Yes. Did Thomas know about the loan? He said the debt had been settled. How? He had documents. What documents? Copies of the 1937 transfer. Only that, yes. Wolfe nodded. Then Thomas knew the public record. Apparently. Not the private agreement. No. Who told him the debt was settled? Eleanor hesitated. Martin Bell. There it was. The name appeared again. Always at the edge. Never in the center. Yet always near the money. That afternoon Wolfe asked me to bring Samuel Price to the brownstone. Price arrived, carrying a small black notebook. I wondered when you'd call. You expected it? Richard told me. When? 2 weeks before he died. What did he say? Price looked at Wolfe. He said, if they ask about the account, don't give them the figures. Why? He was afraid. Of whom? Bell. Wolfe nodded. Did Richard believe Bell had stolen money? Price considered the question. No, then what? He believed Bell had changed the records. To steal, not directly explain. Price opened his notebook. Bell wanted control. Of Ashby House? Yes. And the money? The money was the method. Price showed us a page. It contained columns of figures. The original agreement required repayment. Yes. Every payment reduced the amount owed. Yes. But the account was manipulated. How? Payments were moved between related accounts to create the appearance of repayment. Exactly. Wolfe looked at the notebook. How long did you know? Since 1939. Why did you remain silent? Price looked toward the floor. Because I was afraid. Of Bell? Of losing my job? You were an accountant. I was also a father. Wolfe nodded. He understood. Why did you speak to Richard? Because he was the first Vane who cared about the truth more than the house. At 4 o'clock the telephone rang. It was Thomas Vane. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? I want to see you. Come to the office. I would rather meet privately. That usually means something unpleasant. I have information. Then, he arrived 20 minutes later. Thomas was younger than Eleanor, perhaps 38, well-dressed, impatient, and visibly angry. I know what you're investigating. Congratulations. You've found the old account. Yes, you've misunderstood it. That's possible. The debt was repaid. How? The bank records show it. They show a duplicate payment, an adjustment, that word again. Thomas looked at me. You're accusing Martin Bell. I'm not accusing anyone. Then Wolfe is. I didn't say that either. He leaned closer. I know what you're trying to do. What? Challenge the ownership of Ashby House. I don't own it. Neither do you. True. Then why interfere? Because someone hired us. Richard. Originally. Thomas went pale. Richard is dead. Yes. He was confused. Perhaps he believed things that weren't true, such as That the family had been cheated. Had it? Thomas did not answer. I waited. Finally he said, "The property belongs to the family." "Which branch?" "Our branch." "Why?" "Because the transfer was legal." "Was the debt repaid?" "Yes." "Where is the proof?" He hesitated. "Martin has it." "Of course." He stood. "Stay away from Ashby House, I'll mention it." He left. Wolfe had heard everything. He had been seated behind the door to the adjoining room. I knew because he had a habit of listening when people believed he wasn't. "Well, the present owners are worried." "Naturally." "Thomas says Bell has proof of repayment." "Do you believe him?" "No." "Why?" "Because the only proof we've seen is the duplicate entry." Wolfe nodded. "The false repayment." "Yes." "Then Bell's document may be the same fraud in another form." "What about Thomas?" "He's protecting the property." "His property, or what he believes is his." "Do you think he knows the truth?" "Not entirely." "Then who does?" Wolfe looked at the Bible. "Bell." At 6 o'clock, Wolfe asked me to place the bank statements, the ledger, Richard's letter, and the Vane Bible together. He arranged them in a line. "Observe." I did. The formal deed, the ledger, the bank account, the private letter, the Bible. Yes, they all tell different parts of the same story. "Correct." "The deed says the property transferred in 1937. The public version shows Peachbeans. The financial version, the bank, shows the money. The concealed version, Richard's letter, shows the agreement existed. The private version, and the Bible page?" Wolfe touched the empty place. "The only surviving family record that joins all four." I understood. Loan, property, repayment, ownership. Exactly. Without it, they're separate facts. With it, they become one obligation, and the obligation wasn't fulfilled. Correct. So whoever removed the page destroyed the connection. Yes. Not the evidence. I looked at him. Then Bell's whole defense depends on keeping the page hidden. Yes. And Richard found it. No. Wolfe shook his head. Richard found where it had been. The page is still somewhere else. Yes. Bell has it. Richard believed he did. And now, Bell still does. I frowned. Why hasn't he destroyed it? Wolfe smiled. Because he cannot. Why? Because he needs it. For what? That is the next question. That evening the rain stopped. The city outside the brownstone became black glass and yellow light. Fritz served dinner. Roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, green beans. A pudding involving apples and enough cream to make me forget the existence of the Vane family for nearly 6 minutes. Wolfe ate in silence. Then he said, "Archie." "Yes?" "Tomorrow we find the page." "From Bell?" "Yes." "How?" "We do not ask him where it is." "What do we ask? Who has seen it?" "That's almost the same thing." "No." He cut another piece of beef. "The person who knows where a document is may lie." He paused. "The person who has seen it must remember what it contained." I nodded. "And if Bell refuses?" "He will. If Thomas refuses?" "He may. If everyone refuses?" Wolfe looked at me. "Then we use the evidence." "Which evidence?" He glanced toward the Bible. "Page indentation." "You can recover the writing?" "Yes." I stared. "How?" "Tomorrow." That was all. But I knew Wolfe. He had already decided what the page contained. He simply had not yet decided how much of it he was willing to reveal. The account had never closed. The debt had never been repaid. The property had never been cleanly transferred. And the missing page had survived somewhere in the hands of the man who needed its disappearance most. There was only one difficulty. We still had no idea where Martin Bell had hidden it. And somewhere in New York, I suspected, Martin Bell had the same problem. He knew we were looking. He knew Richard had left instructions. He knew the bank records were no longer safely buried. And he knew that if Wolfe recovered the missing page, 30 years of carefully maintained ownership could collapse in a single afternoon. For the first time since the case began, I was no longer thinking about a family secret. I was thinking about a man who had spent decades protecting one. And men who spend decades protecting a secret rarely surrender it gracefully. Chapter 7. Wolfe reads the missing page. There are occasions when a detective gathers people together because he has discovered the culprit. There are other occasions when he gathers them because he has discovered the truth. The distinction is important. In the first case, someone usually becomes nervous. In the second, everyone does. By 11 o'clock on Monday morning, the office at the brownstone had acquired enough nervousness to require ventilation. Eleanor Vane sat beside the fireplace. Thomas Vane occupied the chair nearest the window. Samuel Price sat with his old black notebook on his knees. Clara Mercer had chosen the straight-back chair beside the bookcase. Martin Bell stood rather than sat. That was deliberate. A man who stands in a detective's office can pretend he is waiting to leave. A man who sits admits he is staying. Inspector Kramer arrived last. He removed his hat, looked around the room, saw the Bible, the ledger, the bank statements, and me, and said, "So this is the family Bible." "Yes, and these are the people. Some of them." Kramer looked at Wolfe. "You said the financial records were enough to interest me. They are enough to interest the police." "That's not what I asked." "No," Kramer grunted. I closed the door. The room became quiet. Sat behind his desk with the old Bible before him. The missing page was still missing, yet by then it had ceased to be the most important object in the room. That was Wolfe's doing. He had spent 3 days proving that a document could disappear without taking the truth with it. He had arranged the evidence in 5 groups: the ledger, the bank records, the document box, Richard Vane's letters, and the altered family history. The Bible sat in the center, not because it was the strongest evidence, because it was the oldest. Wolfe looked at Kramer. "Inspector, yes? We have no murder." Kramer glanced toward Eleanor. "Not yet. Vane's death was certified as natural, heart failure, correct? You think otherwise?" "I think it is possible that his death became useful to someone." Kramer frowned. "That's not the same thing, no. Do you have evidence, not of murder? Then leave it alone." "I intend to." That seemed to surprise Kramer, but Wolfe continued. "We do have evidence of fraud." "How much?" "Enough." "Against whom?" Wolfe looked toward Martin Bell. Bell remained standing. His face was calm, too calm. Wolfe smiled faintly. "That is why you are here." Kramer took a chair. "Start at the beginning." Wolfe folded his hands. "The beginning is 1935. Thomas spoke immediately. "The transfer was 1937. Wolfe looked at him. "The transfer was recorded in 1937. That's the same thing." "No, it is legally the same thing. Not if a prior agreement controlled the transfer." Thomas leaned back. "What agreement? The one your family forgot?" Thomas looked toward Martin Bell. Bell said nothing. Wolfe continued. "In 1935, Charles Vane entered an agreement concerning Ashby House with Edwin Vane." Eleanor listened carefully. "The arrangement involved money advanced by Edwin." "How much?" Kramer asked. "At least $23,650. Kramer whistled softly. "That was substantial." "Very." "Was it a loan?" "Yes." "Secured against the property?" "Yes." "Then the property could not be transferred free of the obligation until repayment." "Correct." Thomas shook his head. "The debt was repaid." Wolfe looked at him. "Was it?" "Yes." "How do you know?" "The records." "Which records?" "The transfer." "That is not a record of repayment. The property was transferred." "Yes." So the deed proves ownership was transferred." Wolfe paused. "It does not prove the condition attached to that transfer was satisfied." Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. Kramer looked toward him. "He's got you there." Thomas glared at him. Wolfe continued. "The private agreement required repayment." "Where is it?" Kramer asked. "That is the problem. The original is missing." "Yes." "The copy?" "Also missing." "The Bible page?" "Missing." Kramer looked irritated. "Then what do you have?" Wolfe pointed to the ledger. "This." I had placed the ledger open to the relevant pages. Wolfe turned it toward Kramer. "The first payment," he pointed, $4,800. The second, $7,250. The third, $11,600. Total, $23,650. Kramer, read the figures. "Those payments were made." "Yes." "Then the debt was paid." "No." Kramer looked up. "Why not?" Wolfe pointed to the bank records. "Because the third payment was recorded twice. Received, yes, and returned, yes. So the books showed the amount coming in and going out." "Exactly. That would balance the account. It would create the appearance of balance." Kramer examined the papers. "Where did the money go?" "Nowhere." "What?" "It remained under the control of the same financial group." Wolfe handed him the transfer documents. "Observe the account ownership." Kramer read. Then read again. The same beneficial interests. Yes. Bell family connections. Yes. Kramer looked toward Martin Bell. Bell's expression remained fixed. You want to explain this? Bell shook his head. No. Wolfe nodded. That is wise. Kramer looked at him. Wise? Any explanation he gives will be worse than silence. Bell finally spoke. You have constructed a theory from incomplete records. No, Wolfe's voice was calm. I have constructed a conclusion from independent records. There is a difference. Indeed. He pointed to the ledger. The ledger records the payments. Then the bank records. The bank records show the same payments. Then Richard's documents. The document box confirms the amounts. Then the old photograph. The family history establishes the people involved. Then the altered dates. The date changes explain the concealment. He placed his hand on the Bible, and the missing page would have connected them. Bell smiled thinly. Would have? Yes. You don't have it. No. Then you don't have the agreement. No. Then you cannot prove it existed. Wolfe looked almost amused. That is where you have made your mistake. The smile disappeared. The page is not necessary. Thomas shifted in his chair. What do you mean? Wolfe looked at him. I mean that the truth does not depend upon one document. He tapped the ledger. The figures are here. The bank records. The transfers are here. The document box. The receipts are here. Richard's letter. The agreement is described here. The altered dates. The concealment is here. He looked toward Clara. And the witness who saw the page being written is here. Clara lowered her eyes. Bell turned toward her. You said you saw nothing, Clara answered quietly. I said I didn't understand what I saw. That is not the same. She looked at Wolfe. Mr. Wolfe asked better questions. Wolfe opened the Bible. This book contains the key, Thomas said. But the page is gone. Yes. Then how can it prove anything? It cannot. Wolfe looked at him. You still don't understand, he turned to Kramer. The missing page has become almost irrelevant. Kramer frowned. Then why are we here? To determine who removed it. And why? Precisely. Wolfe leaned back. The page was removed decades ago. Bell said nothing. Not recently. Still nothing. The stitching proves it. Wolfe held the Bible so that Kramer could see the spine. The binding was repaired in 1968. By whom? Charles Vane. Why? To conceal the earlier removal. Thomas spoke. My grandfather? Yes. Couldn't have known he knew. How? Because he paid for the repair. Eleanor looked startled. How do you know? The receipt. I placed the receipt on the desk. It had been recovered from the old family papers. Kramer read it. Book restoration. Yes, 1968. Yes, who delivered the Bible? Wolfe looked toward Bell. That is the question. Bell said nothing. Wolfe continued. To remove the page without destroying the Bible, the person needed 3 things. He raised one finger. Access. A second. Knowledge. A third. Motivation. He looked at Eleanor. The Bible was kept locked. She nodded. Who had a key? A grandfather. Your mother? Anyone else? She hesitated. Martin Bell. Kramer turned toward Bell. Bell remained still. Why did he have one? Kramer asked. Because he was the family solicitor. Wolfe nodded. More than that, Bell said. I handled legal papers. And financial papers. Yes. And property papers. Yes. And the family Bible. No. Yet you knew what it contained. I knew it contained family records. You claimed never to have read them. Wolfe looked at Clara. Mrs. Mercer. Yes. Did you ever see Mr. Bell with the Bible? Yes. Bell closed his eyes. Where? In the library. When? 1936. What was he doing? Writing in the Bible. I saw the book open. What did you see? Numbers. Bell opened his eyes. That is impossible. Clara looked at him. I remember. Wolfe turned toward Samuel Price. You were the accountant. Yes. You recognized the handwriting in the ledger. Yes. Whose? Price looked at Bell. I believe it was his. Bell said sharply. Believe. Price nodded. I was not certain, but now I am. Kramer leaned forward. You can identify the handwriting? I maintained accounts for years. Price opened his notebook. I know how Mr. Bell formed. His 7s, he pointed to the ledger. His 7s have a slight hook. Then to the bank record, here. Then to an old letter, here. The same hook appeared. Kramer examined them. Bell's face had gone pale. Wolfe did not need to say anything. Price had done it for him. Thomas looked from Bell to Wolfe. You are saying Martin removed the page? I am. Why? Because he knew what it contained. That doesn't prove he removed it. No. Wolfe nodded. Now we reach the important part. He turned toward the Bible. Who benefited? Thomas answered. The person who wanted the debt forgotten. Whoever controlled Ashby House. Correct. And that was my branch. Eventually, Thomas frowned. Eventually? Your branch acquired the property through the 1937 transfer. Yes. Subject to the private agreement. No. Yes. The deed says otherwise. The deed says nothing about the private condition. Thomas stared at him. Then why did Bell protect us? Wolfe looked at Martin Bell. That is the question. Bell remained silent. Wolfe answered it himself. Because he did not merely protect the Vane family. He paused. He protected himself. Kramer leaned forward. Explain. Wolfe opened the bank records. The loan payments did not disappear. They were redirected. Yes. Who controlled the receiving accounts? People connected to Bell. His brother? Yes. His former partner? Yes. His wife's company? Yes. Kramer looked toward Bell. You built a chain. Bell finally spoke. I managed an estate. Over 30 years. I was retained by the family. You moved their money. I managed investments. You concealed an unpaid obligation. I did not. You altered dates. No. You copied figures into a Bible. Bell looked at Clara. She is mistaken. You removed the page? No. You kept the page. Bell's eyes moved. The first time he looked frightened. Wolfe saw it, so did I. Kramer saw it too. Where is it? He asked. Bell said nothing. Wolfe smiled. Exactly. The room remained silent. Wolfe did not press. That was one of his better tricks. When a man is guilty, the instinct is to attack. Wolfe waited. Silence becomes a burden when the other person knows what you know. Finally, Bell said, you have no proof. No. You have theories. No. You have records that could be interpreted in many ways. Yes. You don't have the page. No. Bell's confidence returned. Then you have nothing. Wolfe looked at him. You have just made your second mistake. What? You have assumed the missing page is necessary to establish the debt. It is. No. Wolfe lifted Richard's letter. Richard knew the debt existed. He lifted the ledger. Samuel Price recorded the payments. He lifted the bank statements. The bank recorded the transfers. He lifted the document box. The receipts preserved the amounts. He lifted the altered family records. The dates were changed. Then he looked toward Clara. And Mrs. Mercer saw you copying the figures into the Bible. Bell's lips parted. No sound came. Wolfe continued. The page would merely have repeated what these documents already establish. Eleanor spoke softly. Then why was it removed? Wolfe looked at her. Because your family trusted it. More than the legal records. Yes. Why? Because the Bible was not part of the official system. He closed it. It was a private record. A family record. Exactly, Thomas said. And because the agreement was written there. Yes. Who wrote it? Most likely Bell. Bell shook his head. No. Wolfe ignored him. The formal agreement disappeared. The bank records were altered. The public date was shifted. The ledger was concealed. And the Bible preserved the truth. He looked toward the missing page. That made the Bible dangerous, Kramer. Mr. Bell. Bell looked up. Do you have the page? No. Are you sure? Yes, Wolfe said quietly. That is not true. Bell turned. How would you know? Because Richard wrote that you knew where it was. Richard was mistaken. Perhaps. Wolfe opened the document box. Then why did he leave this? He removed another paper. Bell stared at it. I had not seen it before. It was a small receipt, dated 1968, for the repair of the family Bible. The purchaser's name was Martin Bell. The room went completely silent. Bell looked at the receipt, then at Wolfe. I paid for a repair. Yes. That proves nothing. It proves you handled the Bible. Of course I handled it. After the page had already been removed. Bell said nothing. Why repair it? Because the family wanted it restored. Who told you? Charles Bay. Why? I don't know. Wolfe nodded. You see? No. You have supplied the missing link. I looked at the receipt. Bell paid for the repair. Yes. Which means he knew the page was missing. Yes. And if he knew the page was missing, he knew what had been removed. Yes, unless he discovered it after the fact. Wolfe nodded. Correct. Then how do you prove he removed it? We do not prove it from the repair. He looked toward Clara. We prove it from the opportunity, then toward Price, the knowledge, then toward the financial records, the benefit, then toward Bell, and the fear. Bell stood suddenly. Kramer rose with him. Sit down. Bell sat. Wolfe's voice remained calm. The page was removed before 1968. Yes. Someone knew the private agreement. Yes. Someone had access to the locked Bible. Yes. Someone benefited from the disappearance. Yes. Who? Nobody spoke. Wolfe looked at Bell. You. Bell stared at him, then laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You think that is enough? No. Wolfe turned to the desk. He picked up the Bible. Then he opened it to the missing page. There was nothing there, only an empty place. Yet Wolfe ran one finger along the edge. The page was removed carefully. Yes. The stitching was preserved. Yes, the damage was later concealed. Yes, the repair was done by you. Yes, the family never knew the page was gone. Not until recently. Correct. Richard discovered the absence. Yes. And began reconstructing the figures. Yes. Then he found the duplicate payment. Yes. Then the hidden account. Yes. Then the agreement. Not the agreement. Wolfe smiled. The shadow of the agreement. Bell stared at him. Wolfe continued. He did not need the page. He needed what the page connected. Thomas suddenly stood. Wait. Everyone looked at him. If Bell removed the page, why did he leave the ledger? Wolfe nodded. An excellent question. Thomas looked almost hopeful. Then perhaps you're wrong. No. Why not? Because Bell believed the ledger was harmless. Why? Because the ledger did not identify the legal condition. Wolfe pointed toward the bank. Statements. It contained figures. Then toward the Bible. The Bible contained the relationship. Loan, property, repayment, ownership. Exactly. Thomas sat slowly. So the page was the only document that joined them. Yes. And Bell removed it. Yes. Then why keep the figures? Because figures without context can be explained. Wolfe looked at him. A family debt can be called an estate expense. A transfer can be called repayment. A payment can be called an adjustment. A date can be called an error. But a signed private agreement cannot be explained away. Thomas looked toward Bell. Unless it disappears. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. Kramer picked up the bank records. I've seen enough. He turned toward Bell. You'll come with me. Bell stood. He looked at Wolfe. You still haven't found the page, Wolfe said. No, Bell smiled. For the first time it looked genuine. Then you haven't solved everything. Wolfe's eyes rested on him. Mr. Bell. Bell stopped. You have misunderstood what I have solved. Bell waited. The page was not the mystery. What was? The reason everyone needed it to disappear. Bell said nothing. Wolfe continued. The money, the property, the false repayment, the altered date, the hidden accounts, the family agreement, the fear of Richard Vane. He paused. All of them existed without the page. The page merely remembered them. Kramer took Bell by the arm. They moved toward the door. Before leaving, Bell looked back. Where is the page? Bell's eyes narrowed. You know. No, you don't? No. Then why are you so certain? Wolfe smiled. Because you have spent more time worrying about the page than I have. Bell went still. Kramer opened the door. Come on. They left. The room remained silent. Eleanor looked at Wolfe. Will we ever find it? Yes. When? When the person who has it understands that it no longer protects him. Thomas looked at the empty place in the Bible. Then the page really is almost irrelevant. Correct. Samuel Price smiled faintly. It took 30 years to prove that. Wolfe looked toward him. No. It took 30 years to conceal it. He closed the Bible. It took 3 days to understand it. Kramer returned 10 minutes later. He had forgotten his hat. He picked it up, then looked at Wolfe. One thing, yes? If Bell didn't destroy the page, where is it? Wolfe considered. The obvious place. Kramer waited. Where would a man hide a family document he could not safely keep at home? Kramer frowned. A bank? No. A safe deposit box? Too obvious. Law office? Too accessible. Somewhere outside the city? Possible. Kramer looked irritated. You know, I suspect. Where? Wolfe pointed toward the document box. Richard found the trail. The page? Richard did not find the page. He found the hiding place? Yes. Kramer stared. And you? I know where to look. Kramer smiled. Then I suppose I'll hear from you. You will. He left. When the door closed, I sat down. So? Wolfe looked at me. So? We've got Bell. Financial fraud. Yes. The false report. Yes. The altered date. Yes. The private agreement. Yes. The missing page. Still missing. And you know where to find it. I have a good idea. Are you going to tell me? No. Why? Because you will go looking, that's what I do. And you will disturb something, also what I do. He reached for a book. I watched him. Wolfe, One question. Only one? For now. He looked up. If the page no longer matters, why are you still interested in finding it? For several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered. Because Archie, a detective should never leave a sentence unfinished. He closed the book. I smiled. That sounded like Wolfe. Outside, New York was moving toward evening. Cars rolled through wet streets. Elevated trains rattled in the distance. Somewhere downtown, money was being counted, transferred, hidden, invested, and probably stolen. Inside the brownstone, the old Vane Bible lay closed upon Wolfe's desk. One page was missing. But by then we knew what it had said. Not word for word, not line for line, but sufficiently. It had recorded a loan. It had tied that loan to Ashby House. It had stated the condition of repayment. It had preserved the names of those responsible. And it had survived long enough for Richard Vane to begin asking questions. The page had been removed because it connected facts that powerful people preferred to keep separate. But paper was stubborn. The ledger remembered. The bank remembered. The receipts remembered. Samuel Price remembered. Clara Mercer remembered. Even the dates remembered. And now Wolfe knew who had benefited from forgetting. Only one thing remained: to recover the page itself. And when we did, I had a feeling Wolfe would not read it to learn what had happened. He would read it to discover what someone had been afraid we might find. That was usually where Nero Wolfe became most dangerous. Chapter 8. The secret written between the lines. By Tuesday morning, the missing page had become the most famous piece of paper in New York that nobody had seen. This was partly because Inspector Kramer had taken an interest in it. Anything that interests Kramer acquires a certain unpleasant dignity. It was also because Martin Bell had been taken downtown. The bank records had been placed under examination, and Thomas Vane had suddenly discovered that his certainty about Ashby House was considerably less certain than it had been 48 hours earlier. As for me, I had slept badly. Not because of Bell, not because of the bank, not even because of the possibility that someone had managed to keep a piece of paper hidden for nearly 90 years. I slept badly because Wolfe had told me he knew where to look. And then he had refused to tell me. That was cruel. There are certain privileges belonging to a detective's assistant. One is being sent into rooms where sensible people would not willingly go. Another is being blamed when things go wrong. A third is being kept ignorant until the exact moment when ignorance becomes unbearable. Wolfe had perfected the third. At 8:30 I entered the office. Wolfe was already at his desk. The Bible lay open. Beside it were the ledger, the bank statements, Richard Vane's letters, the document box, and several sheets of paper covered with Wolfe's handwriting. The orchids in the south room had received their morning attention from Theodore. The dining room smelled of coffee and toast. New York outside was grey and damp, with the sort of morning that makes a man appreciate walls. I looked at Wolfe. Did you find the page? Good morning, good morning. You could have said that yesterday. You did not ask yesterday. I did. You asked whether I knew where it was. And I said I had. A good idea. Which means you didn't. It means precisely what I said. I pulled out a chair. Then why is the Bible open? Because I am finished with the page. I stared at him. You're finished with the missing page? Without finding it? Yes. You've been telling me for days that the page mattered. No. You said it was the connection. I said it was a connection. That's a distinction. A useful one. He turned a sheet of paper toward me. Read. It contained a list. 4,800. 7,250. 11,600. Then, beneath them, beside the figures Wolfe had written one word. UMPay. I looked at him. The debt. Yes. It was never settled. Correct. The page would have said that. Yes. But we don't need it. No. Because the figures prove it. The figures establish the financial movement. The bank records establish the transfers. The receipts establish the payments. The dates establish the sequence. The altered records establish the concealment, and Richard's letter establishes the agreement. Wolfe nodded. So what did the page add? He looked at me. Authority. I waited. It was the family's private record of the agreement. It joined the facts in a form that future generations could understand without consulting the financial records, and that was why it had to disappear. Precisely. I looked again at the Bible. Then Bell's predecessor removed it. Yes, and Bell inherited the fraud. More than that, he continued it. Yes, why? Wolfe leaned back. Because by the time Bell inherited the family accounts, the deception had become profitable. At 10 o'clock, Eleanor Vane arrived. She was carrying a small suitcase. I looked at it. What have you got? Documents. More, she nodded. Richards. I took the suitcase. Wolfe looked up. Bring it here. She placed it on the desk. I found it this morning. Where? In my uncle's bedroom. Where exactly? Under the wardrobe. I looked at Wolfe. He gave no reaction. Eleanor opened the suitcase. Inside were old envelopes, photographs, receipts, letters, and a packet tied with string. Wolfe reached for the packet. Did you open it? No. Good. He cut the string. Inside was a letter dated 1938. The writer was Edwin Vane. The recipient was Charles Vane. Wolfe read it. Then he handed it to me. It was brief. The language was formal. The meaning was not. Edwin acknowledged receiving 2 payments. He stated that the balance remained outstanding, and he added a sentence that made everything plain. Until the final obligation is discharged, Ashby House remains held under the understanding entered into by our family. I looked at Wolfe. That's it. No. What do you mean? That is another fragment. Another? Yes. He placed the letter beside the ledger. The page did not contain a unique truth. It contained the same truth. Exactly. Eleanor sat. Then why did they remove it? Wolfe looked at her. Because people fear a simple document more than a complicated truth. She frowned. Why? Because a complicated truth can be disputed. He tapped the letter. A sentence like this cannot easily be explained away. At 11, Samuel Price arrived. He looked older than he had the first time. He removed his hat and placed it on his knees. Wolfe motioned him to sit. Mr. Price. Yes. You told Archie that Richard Vane had discovered the missing figures. Yes. Did Richard show you the Bible? Price hesitated. Yes. When? About 3 weeks before he died. Was the page missing then? Yes. Did he know that? He was certain. Why? Price looked at the Bible. He showed me the binding. Then? He said someone had removed the page deliberately. Did he tell you who? No. Did he suspect Martin Bell? Price nodded. Yes. Why? He had found the bank records. Anything else? Price reached into his coat. He removed a folded sheet. I kept this. Wolfe took it. It was an old accounting note. Several figures. 2 names, 1 date, and a notation in the margin. Balance carried forward. Wolfe stared at it. Where did you find this? In the old accounting room. Who wrote it? I believe it was Edwin Vane. Wolfe nodded. It proves the balance remained, yes. Then the debt was never closed. Price shook his head. No, thank you. Price looked toward Eleanor. Your uncle was right, she said. About what? The house. He swallowed. He said the family had been arguing about ownership for years without understanding the original question. What was the question? Price looked at Wolfe. Wolfe answered. Not who owned Ashby House. He paused. Who had earned the right to own it? At noon Clara Mercer arrived. She carried no papers, only her memory. That was enough. Wolfe asked her to sit. Mercer. Yes. You told Archie you saw Martin Bell with the Bible in 1936. Yes. What was he doing? Writing. Where? In the library. Was anyone else there? Charles Vane. Edwin Vane. No. Did you hear them? Not clearly. What did you hear? She thought. Mr. Charles said it must remain in the family record. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And Bell, he said. It will. Did you see what he wrote? Numbers. She shook her head. Did he close the Bible? Yes. Did he lock it? Mr. Charles did. Did Bell have a key? Yes. Kramer, who had entered quietly during the conversation, said, Why? Clara looked at him. He was the solicitor. Kramer grunted. That gives him access. Wolfe nodded. And opportunity, and motive. Kramer looked at Bell's empty chair. He had all 3. Yes. But you're not saying he was the original thief. No, Kramer frowned. Then who? Wolfe looked toward the Bible. His predecessor. I knew what he meant. Martin Bell had not been the beginning. He had inherited a system that mattered. A great many crimes survive because someone commits them, A much smaller number survive because someone inherits them and discovers that the safest way to protect himself is to pretend they were never crimes at all. Wolfe explained it. Martin Bell entered the Vane family business after the original agreement had already been made. How much later? Kramer asked. Several years. Then who removed the page? His predecessor. Name? George Bell. Kramer looked up. His father? Yes, Martin Bell's father had been the family's solicitor in the late 1930s. The man had handled the property transfer. He had access to the Bible. He knew the financial agreement existed. And, according to the surviving records, he had supervised the final transfer of Ashby House. Wolfe opened another file. George Bell prepared the 1937 transfer. Kramer read the document. His signature, yes. He certified the property was transferred without encumbrance. Yes. But the debt remained. Yes. Then he was lying. Correct. Kramer looked at Wolfe. Why? Because he had already altered the financial record. How? Wolfe pointed to the duplicate payment. By treating money transferred within related accounts as repayment. That was George? Yes. George began it. And Martin continued it. Exactly. Eleanor looked pale. My family knew? Some did. Who? Charles Vane knew the original arrangement. Did he know the records had been altered? I believe he suspected. Then why didn't he expose it? Because the family was already divided. Over the property, over money. Same thing often. Wolfe's expression became severe. Charles was afraid that challenging the arrangement would destroy the family, Eleanor whispered. And instead it destroyed the truth. Yes, Thomas, who had been silent, finally spoke. Then my grandfather was not the owner. Wolfe looked at him. He was the recorded owner. That's not what I asked. No. Thomas stared at the floor. Then my family lived in that house under a false title, under an incomplete title. That's worse. Not necessarily. Why? Because a false title may be worthless. Wolfe paused. An incomplete title may be corrected. The door opened. Inspector Kramer entered fully. Behind him was Martin Bell. He had been released pending further investigation. His face was drawn. He looked older. He saw the Bible, then the ledger, then the bank records. Finally, he saw the letter from Edwin Vane. He stopped. I see. Wolfe said. Sit. Bell did not move. I have nothing more to say. You have already said enough. Then why am I here? Because the case is not complete. Bell looked at Kramer. Kramer said, sit down. Bell sat. Wolfe folded his hands. Mr. Bell, your father removed the page. Bell looked at him. I don't know that. You knew he had handled the Bible. Of course. You knew he prepared the 1937 transfer. Yes. You knew the debt existed. I knew there had been discussions. You knew the account. I was a child. Later you became the family solicitor. Yes, you discovered the discrepancy. Bell's silence was answer enough. You continued the arrangement. No. You moved the account. For legitimate reasons. You maintained the false repayment. I maintained the family accounts. You preserved the deception. Bell's face tightened. You cannot prove that. Wolfe nodded. I do not need to prove every act separately. Why? Because the pattern proves the purpose. He stood. Wolfe rarely stood during a revelation. That made it significant. He moved to the center of the room. The Bible remained on his desk. He spoke slowly. Let us assume that the missing page contained exactly what we believe it contained. Bell watched him. A loan was made. He raised one finger. The loan was secured by an understanding concerning Ashby House. A second. The property was transferred only subject to repayment. A third. Payments were made. A fourth. The final obligation was not discharged. A fifth. Someone manipulated the records to make it appear discharged. He looked at Kramer. That is not theory. Kramer nodded. That's established. Wolfe continued. Now remove the page. He closed the Bible. The family no longer possesses a direct written statement of the condition. He opened the ledger. But the figures remain. He lifted the bank statements. The transfers remain. He lifted Richard's papers. The references remain. Did the old letter. The acknowledgement remains. He pointed to Clara. The witness remains. Then Samuel. The accountant remains. He looked at Eleanor. And the heir who found the problem remains. Finally he faced Bell. And the man who inherited the system remains. Thomas stared at the documents. Then the missing page did not hide the truth. No, it only hid the easiest proof. Exactly. Eleanor looked at Wolfe. So the page was never the secret. Wolfe turned toward her. It was merely the most convenient place to hide it. I smiled. That was the sentence. The one he had been building toward since the beginning. Wolfe returned to his chair. I looked at the ledger, the bank statements, and the old document box. And the page itself? Wolfe gave a small shrug. Paper can disappear. He looked toward the figures. Arithmetic is less cooperative, Kramer grunted. So you solved it without the page? No. Wolfe's eyes rested on him. I solved it because they removed the page. There was a long silence. I understood then. The removal itself had created the shape of the crime. If the page had remained, the truth would have been obvious. If the page had been destroyed in some careless act, the disappearance might have meant nothing. But it had been carefully removed. The binding had been preserved. The family record had been concealed. The ledger had been altered. The dates had shifted. The money had traveled in circles. The property had changed hands. Every action had been designed to erase one thing, the connection, and that was precisely what Wolfe had reconstructed. Not the missing words, the relationship between the surviving words. Kramer picked up the ledger. What happens to Ashby House? Wolfe looked toward Eleanor. That is a legal question. Meaning? Ownership must be reviewed. Thomas spoke bitterly. By whom? By lawyers. He looked at Kramer. And accountants. Kramer smiled. You really know how to ruin a family's afternoon. I do what I can. Eleanor turned toward Thomas. What happens now? Thomas looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, I suppose we stop pretending. She nodded. It was not forgiveness. It was not agreement. But it was honest. And honesty was a considerable improvement. Kramer stood. I'll have the bank records secured. Good, and the old account documents. Yes. I'll also have examined property transfer. Wise. Kramer looked toward Bell. Your father is dead. Bell said nothing. You are not being charged for something he did merely because you're his son. Bell looked relieved. Then Kramer continued. But if you continued it knowingly, that's another matter. The relief vanished. Kramer put on his hat. That is enough for today. He turned toward the door, then stopped. One thing. Wolfe looked at him. If the page turns up, bring it to me, Kramer grinned. You don't want to read it? No. Why not? I already know what it says. Kramer shook his head. You are an irritating man, so I have been told. Kramer left. Bell remained. He looked exhausted. Mr. Wolfe. Yes, if the page is never found, what happens? The truth remains, but the document may remain locked. You don't care? I care about truth, not paper. Paper is useful. Bell gave a tired laugh. Then perhaps I should tell you something. Wolfe waited. Bell looked at the Bible. I saw the page. When? Years ago. Where? Bell swallowed. In my father's papers. When? After his death. What did it say? Bell closed his eyes. I don't remember every word. What do you remember? The final sentence. Wolfe waited. Bell looked at him. It said, when the debt is paid, the house is theirs. Until it remains ours. Nobody moved. Thomas looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Wolfe. Wolfe did not react. Bell continued. My father removed it. Why? Because he had already certified the transfer. And later, my father died. You kept the arrangement. I inherited his files and his secrets. Bell looked down. Yes. Wolfe nodded. Thank you. Bell looked surprised. Yes, you're not going to ask where the page is. No. Why? Wolfe leaned back. Because you have finally told me what I needed. Bell left with Kramer. The brownstone became quiet again. The city moved beyond the windows. A truck rattled along the street. A horn sounded. Somewhere upstairs, Theodore was discussing orchids with someone who had probably done nothing to deserve it. I gathered the papers, one by one. The ledger, the bank statements, the receipts, Richard's letters, the old account note, the property documents, the evidence of the altered dates, the family Bible. I put them in a neat pile. Then I looked at Wolfe. You knew. I suspected. You knew. Bell's father removed the page. I suspected. You knew, Bell continued it. I knew. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have asked questions. Always ask questions. Exactly, I smiled. All right. I looked at the Bible. The page really doesn't matter anymore. No, not even to you. Wolfe glanced at it. It matters historically. That's not what I meant. No, he picked up the Bible. The page mattered when someone believed its absence could protect a falsehood. He closed it. Now it is only a missing page. I thought about that. Then I said, "You know, for a man who claims not to care about sentiment, you spent a lot of time worrying about an old family Bible." Wolfe looked offended. "I was interested in the evidence." "Of course, I have no interest in the Bible." "Of course, I have interest in orchids, natural food, obviously, and solving crimes." "That goes without saying." He reached for the bell. I stopped him. "One more question," he sighed. "Ask. When you first saw the torn binding, what did you really notice?" "The page." "That's all?" "No. What else?" He looked at me. The absence was too neat. I waited. "People who destroy documents think destruction is the object." He leaned back. "People who remove documents think absence is the object." And that told you that whoever took the page wanted future readers to believe the page had simply ceased to exist. Which meant someone wanted the family to remember the story without remembering the condition. I nodded slowly. So the missing page wasn't a hole in the story. No. What was it? Wolfe's eyes settled on the Bible. A deliberate silence. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped. The sidewalks shone beneath the streetlights. New York had resumed its ordinary business. People hurried home. Cars moved through the wet streets. Shop windows brightened. Somewhere, a banker was probably balancing an account. Somewhere else, a lawyer was probably preparing a document. And somewhere, perhaps in an old, safe or forgotten box, the missing page from the Vane family Bible was waiting in darkness. It no longer frightened anyone. It no longer controlled the ownership of Ashby House. It no longer possessed the power its remover had imagined. The truth escaped it. I stood by the window. "Wolfe, if the page turns up tomorrow?" "Yes." "What will you do?" "Read it. And if it says exactly what Bell remembered, I shall be, mildly disappointed." "Why?" "Because I prefer surprises." I laughed. "You spent the entire case proving there were no surprises." "Not at all." He looked toward the orchids. "The surprise was that the truth survived." I looked back at him. "That's almost sentimental. Don't be absurd." He rang for Theodore. Dinner was approaching. The Vane affair was finished. The fraud would be examined. The property would be reviewed. The financial records would be placed where accountants and lawyers could argue over them for months. The family would have to decide what to do with Ashby House. But the central mystery was settled. A page had been removed from a Bible. A debt had been removed from the family history. A property had been transferred under a false appearance of finality. Money had been moved until an unpaid obligation looked settled. Dates had been altered. Records had been separated. And yet every surviving fragment had remembered something. The ledger remembered the numbers. The bank remembered the movement. The receipts remembered the payments. The letters remembered the agreement. The witnesses remembered the room. The dates remembered the deception. And the empty space in the Bible remembered that someone had wanted all of it forgotten. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and folded his hands across his stomach. The page was never the secret, Archie. It was merely the most convenient place to hide it. I looked at the ledger, the bank statements, and the old document box. "And the page itself?" Wolfe gave a small shrug. "Paper can disappear. Arithmetic is less cooperative." I grinned. "Inspector Kramer will love that. He will dislike it. Same thing with Kramer." Wolfe closed his eyes. "The distinction is yours." The room settled into silence. I looked once more at the old Bible. One page missing, one family deceived, one property almost stolen by arithmetic, and a secret that had survived because every attempt to erase it had left another mark. That was the part I liked best. The missing page had not erased the truth. It had created a pattern around it, and once Nero Wolfe saw the pattern, there was nowhere left for the lie to hide.